Hi, can everyone hear me? Yeah, okay. Thank you for inviting me here. I guess I'll share my screen, but I have two screens, so I'm gonna mute this one first. I guess, let's see. Sure. All right, let's see. Okay. Yeah, I guess like the introduction was saying, I work with art, music, and software development. So my practice is definitely situated at the intersections of all these different disciplines. My interest in the oral logic has always been underlying my work. For example, in my earlier practice in sound and performance, it's always been very cathartic, and I was very, very interested in vocalization, exploring the vibration through your inner organ, the cavities inside our body. And for a very long time, I used it as a ritual, or even a surviving strategy of, this feeling, this gesture of objecting. Because I was born and raised in China, and I moved to Canada around 2015, and I started my art and music career after I moved here. I'm sure a lot of people who share the same kind of migration stories will have this feeling of, how your mother tongue and, English and the Western culture kind of collapse in your, both identity and, this feeling of losing or loss in translation. Yeah, and so that was one aspect of my interest in the oral. And I guess the real starter of this project was last year. I've been receiving a series of treatment, of like physiotherapy for my TMJ, and because I work full time digitally, so I'm sure a lot of people share the same experience where your body just can't really hold up to working in this fashion, and all the bad sitting posture, uses phones, they all factor in this really my shitty condition of my body. So I thought a lot about how, as we're working with digital bodies, software or, automated algorithms, and how they in return reconfigure my own body and my own thinking. And during this process, we're losing agencies over our own body, and we're gaining something that is, hybrid. So following this train of thoughts, I was doing research at, the oral in relationship with technology. And there were two main texts that really influenced in this project. The first one is this essay from Margaret Moore's in 1994. The title is "What Do Cyborgs Eat? The Oral Logic in an Information Society." In this essay, actually, you know, the oral logic, it's actually coming from this essay, and Margaret really talks about how, you know, we can use operate. And then I was thinking more about, you know, this metaphor of cannibalism, and then stumbled upon this manifesto, anthropophago. It means Cannibalist Manifesto. It was from this literature movement in Brazil in the early 20th century. In this movement or this manifesto, they were talking about how when the indigenous people were invaded and colonized by Portuguese, how they started some rituals by, you know, because they believe by drinking the enemy or the other's blood, it will make them stronger. And in the context of literature or translation, they're thinking about how, you know, because of this post-colonial conditions, how this, how it will actually make their literal cultural more stronger. And I was really fascinated by seeing this, you know, like the metaphorical stance of cannibalism, how they think it's metaphorically eats Shakespeare in the translation. So having all this background research and feeding back to my own practice, and I realized I was very interested in cannibalism as a metaphor to think about translation, to think about cultural identity and technology, not only as in digital media, but also in a broader sense. If we see writing as a technology, and how, you know, natural languages and the translations between natural languages, as well as computational languages, operate in a metaphorical cannibalistic mechanism. So yeah, I'm showing right now. I'm showing a in-depth portfolio of my work, and I found this process very interesting because I usually build web pages for my projects during the stage of research and conceptualization, and I found this type of nestable and hyperlinked filing structure really helped me connecting dots and the networks of my thoughts. And, you know, going back to the metaphor, you know, this type of thinking is resulted from the recursivity in coding language and the media software that we use and inherit the recursivity. And this how this the method of working feedback to my own thinking, it's somewhat cannibalistic. So I guess the very first work from this project is actually from another project called Error. It was initially commissioned. I was commissioned by a museum in Beijing to work to come up with a series of work with machine learning, and that's when I think it was 2018. That's when I started working with machine learning. I've played with a couple of the different libraries, like WaveNet from Google for speech and sound, and GANs obviously, and also OpenAI. So during this project, I was so curious about like how the in the experiments of training artificial intelligence, there are a lot of errors. Yeah, and of course there are also like biases, as Yvette was talking about in her research, and then I stepped upon this really creepy anecdote about the first case of virtual cannibalism. It happened during DARPA's early experiments. So what it did is they were training 2 agents at first, and they name these 2 agents Adam and Eve. And because I guess they need friends, so they created a 3rd agent named Steve. And during the process, as they're training Adam and Eve to recognize food or in other activities, and Adam and Eve someday just found they thought Steve was apple, and they just eat their friend Steve. So I found this story super fucked up and interesting. So that was the beginning of what the error number 4, where I created this installation that contains a few different elements. For example, this interactive web app right now it's showing here is it's a web app where I was using a machine MLP5.js. They have some pre-trained data set that it can recognize objects. So I use it. I put it in front of a mirror and ask the audience it's checking it out. The audience will be recognized through the webcam, and the app will falsely recognize humans as different objects. And another elements in this, I also made a single channel video, which I used, is entirely composed of stock videos. And this essay, it's based on that anecdote I was just talking about. And starting from there, I was like very I found it so funny and kind of ridiculous that how they name these when they're conducting experiments, they name these people from Bible. It's very biblical. And so I was and at the time I was playing with different neural network, and then I was working with this recurrent neural network, and I feed this algorithm with John Milton's Paradise Lost. If you are familiar with this text, it's a very long poem, and it talks about, you know, the genesis of world. And yeah, and I created this fictional character. You know, this is actually the anagram of Paradise Lost, called Sir Salad Poet. And yeah, and it was written, the text is written in the style of John Milton's Paradise Lost. Yeah, through this process, you know, working with machine learning and working with neural network, I was interested to find out that how if you look at it as the process of eaten and being eaten, this is like how English language is, you know, being transformed, being eaten by coding language. So that was the starter of thinking about this project. Another little thought behind, you know, the setup of this human skeleton that's eating its tailbone, which is a mirror. And, you know, because how being how the web application, it's forcefully recognizing things, and you know, being objectified by an object in error creates this infinite feedback loop between this mirror and the webcam. And it's performing a sort of metaphorical autophagy. And that was the starter of the oral logic exhibition. And following this logic, I created a few new work. The centerpiece is this, it's called Garrulous Guts, where I collaborated with my partner to create this generative score, and we fed this, you know, score with 4 different sounds. The first one is machine learned speech, where I was using WaveNet and I was using the Google's speech data set. But unfortunately, because you know, I don't have enough computing power, so it was like half trained and half generated. So the result is something very, very bizarre. It's you can, sorry, you can sort of recognize some English words, but in general, it's very illegible. And I was also thinking about how you know, the illegibility almost sounds like when you were burping or when you're vomiting, and there's this giant mass of, you know, unwanted and desire. So with this score, we also used this really fantastic sound bank of vomit sounds, and to balance it in sound a little bit more, I also found this sound therapy program people use to cure nausea, to cure vomits. The sound eventually sound very new agey, but yeah. So we created the sound, and then we play through this sound through 2 subwoofers, and on the surface of the subwoofer, I placed a bunch of empty capsules, and in some of the capsules, it contained antibiotics and anti-estrogen hormone. In here, I was, you know, thinking how on very, very daily basis, on very minimal basis, how we survive, how we live. You know, all these medical technologies or biomedical technologies are very subtly changing us through the oral, and and by creating this structure of let me show a better video, like turning the inside of the body and out. It's creating this feedback loop that's somewhat passive, and I thought that's a very direct reflection of how, you know, how we live with these subtle biomedical technologies. That's one of the work. And another series of process I came up with during this project was, I name it Deep Aware Triads. In this project, I was attempting to think like an AI. What I meant was like how, you know, how neural networks works is that for example, this is a very, very basic unit that compose a neural network. It requires inputs, and then there's always, you know, many hidden layers in the middle, which is definitely unseen, and then there's the output. So I was interested to view as a neural network, and I was curious to see how, you know, going back to the cannibalistic metaphor, how I give away some part of my agency, and willing voluntarily being eaten, and I was curious how that result will look like. So I sort of created my own kind of diagram by you applying that basic unit of neural network, and then make it nested. So this is a basic diagram I was thinking about. And then I wrote a script to scrape stock images and using it as a data set. So based on this diagram and with a whole folders of images I scraped, I created these bubbles, these digital collages. And let me see if I can show a bigger image. The process is I used, the content aware function in Photoshop. And I was thinking, if we consider each image as each individual body, the process of collaging, the process of blurring the boundaries of the different images, it's almost like making them, eat each other's boundaries. And by doing that, I created the results are these really obscure brushes and textures, and they appear to stimulate pareidolia, which is a condition where you or human will recognize things. Usually it's out of clouds. Sometimes you see a smiley face when you look at in the sky, or and that's what I try to achieve here. And this 3 circles each kind of function in, well, each has a theme. The first one being the hormonal. So I was thinking about how different register through this hormonal process. The uterus, eating hormone, like hormones that are embedded in our food, that change, how they will influence our body. And the second one is through the mouth, where the speech, the bacterias, and all of that. And then there's the spinal, how our brains are connected through the bones, the spinal, and how our internal networks really really being eaten by these external artificial networks. So yeah, and through building this project, working on this project, I obviously think a lot about is there any strategy or solution, or is there any methods we can adapt to think to acclaim more agency or to object being eaten, or to change this passive negative feedback loop into somewhat positive. And the answer is, it's I don't know, but learning from the Brazilian translation theory, as thinking about the symbolic gesture of vomiting, how the reason we vomit is because there is usually some foreign bodies that are entering our system, and our system rejects it. So I was thinking, so I made these chewing gum and printed the command and control keys on the chewing gum, and that's the work. Thinking about how chewing gum is such a useless and unproductive edible, and what we get from it is sugar, usually, and the satisfaction of chewing and digesting, not even digesting, because it's not even in your system, and you spit it out. So yeah, I know I still have a lot to explore here, but for me it's a funny gesture of rejection. Yeah. And that was the project. Okay.
Thank you, Xuan. That was very interesting. Does anybody have any questions? You can open the discussion up.
I just found something very interesting. I just want to express that after I hear your presentation.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it just reminded me of a very old research, and it was about how is the process that kids are learning language. And the interesting part was they found out some mistakes which kids do in their own language while they're learning that is a grammar rule in another language. So I don't know, it just reminded me of that. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, it's very interesting to think about language and especially when you are bilingual or multiple languages. And I found the process of because how language really defines or configures how we think. For me personally, because I am Chinese, so and Chinese language is it's not a phonetic language. It's pictograms. So I found myself think visually a lot more than the other. And having know how to doing coding work, and that process also really factor in how I think.
Yep, thank you so much.
Ooh.
Any
Yeah,
more? Go ahead.
Oh, I was just finding it very interesting because I have two screens here, and you know the fact that this setup is like distributing my body. Like I have to look at this screen and then like look at you, or not even looking at you, it's looking at the screen. But yeah.
I was gonna ask something. At first, you were talking about how this idea of cannibalism would kind of takes over the predecessor, and then I thought that was like kind of your approach, and then towards the end, with the three circles, you hinted at maybe things can converge and still identify as their own and not totally be lost. So, and you were asking these questions on like if this is possible and can, I don't know, it seemed like you were at first into like the destructive mentality, and then you were wondering if things can't be totally forgotten. Does this make any sense to you?
Yeah, totally. I guess it's a process of rejecting and merging. And I think my position is there's no such efficient way. And instead of, I guess, being aware of the awareness of the agency lost, or the awareness of the boundaries or the merging, is more important than purely destroying it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, though.
Xuan, I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
When you're talking about unproductive machines, how can we measure this unproductivity? How do you define unproductivity with the way that AI functions?
I don't, sorry, I don't recall. I think I mentioned unproductivity when I was talking about the chewing gum, because at the meeting, we three were talking about the connections between our practices. And Yvette was talking about her, the parabiology, and, you know, how we're talking about how it is unproductive for human, but not for machines, I guess. Yeah, I guess this project I was presenting is not necessarily that unproductive, because I did produce so many work. But I think the thinking about the unproductive is from different perspectives. It's very interesting, especially right now, how we are made to be unproductive, but at the same time required to be productive. And yeah, and that causes stresses and, you know, all these uneasiness. Yeah, I think Will talk more about the unproductive machines.